I'm Christopher Lydon, and this is Open Source.
And here comes Robinson, trying to steal home. He's safe, says the ump. He's out, says Yogi Berra. And brother, is Yogi hopping.
On Jackie Robinson Day 2026, every player in Major League Baseball will be wearing the immortal Dodgers number 42. Listeners, if you think you know the Jackie Robinson story, think again with us around the most affecting sports book I can remember reading. It's titled Kings and Pawns, about two all-time star black athletes, both of them race pioneers, heroes of conscience. First, Jack Roosevelt Robinson, who integrated big league baseball in 1947, and the All-American college football star and singer supreme, Paul Robeson, whose earth-shaking bass baritone voice made history on opera stages all around the world. You probably have an image of Robinson on the bass path. Here is the sound of Paul Robeson singing.
Old man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling, he keeps on rolling.
Welcome, Howard Bryant. You've written a book of tragic ironies and overpowering interest. Maybe the deeper subject then and now is, how does a black man make it into the Hall of Fame of American heroes, well beyond baseball? And at what price? Sketch these two men first, and we'll get to the testing time that brought them together.
First of all, thank you for having me on, Christopher. It's a pleasure. Been listening to you for years.
Thank you.
This is just a story that I found so fascinating, mostly because it was sitting in plain sight for so long, and I considered myself a Jackie Robinson scholar, and yet never really dug into the story. One, obviously, Paul Robeson is a giant, an American Renaissance man, the third African-American to be admitted into Rutgers, one of the greatest college football players on Walter Camp's All-American teams in both 1917 and 1918. He was a baseball coach of Lou Gehrig at Columbia when he was at Columbia Law. Amazing. He played in this little startup called the National Football League in 1920 and 21 and was also a lawyer. And that's not even including him being a Hollywood actor, being an opera singer, being a concert singer. He's just a titanic figure in terms of just raw talent.
People run out of ways to describe the glory of his singing. I'm thinking of Simon Callow in the New York Review of Books just a few years ago. In Britain, where Simon Callow grew up, Paul Robeson was deeply admired, he writes. For us, he was the noble representation, the beau ideal of his race, physically magnificent, finely spoken, fiercely intelligent, charismatic, but not at all threatening.
Which is very difficult to do when you are all those things and also 6'3" and 250 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, the image of Robeson is one of regality, but also of gentility. He was a really, really fascinating human being. And then, of course, on the other side, you've got Jackie Robinson, where you have a more contemporary figure who we all have seen in our newsreels. And some of us have been lucky enough to see him live, like yourself, and you see that physicality and also how fierce he was as a player and also as a man in terms of somebody who was very much committed to equal rights, equality, and was not willing to back down at any level. His ferocity on and off the field is something that I was drawn to as a younger person growing up, but then even reading about him and writing about him, it's even been more so.
You're right. I was exposed to him when I was just a kid, and I'm one of the few people, maybe the only person who's interviewed you, Howard, who actually saw him do the most exciting play in baseball, which was, as you wrote, stealing home base. 1951, Braves Field, Boston, September 26th. Lou Burdett was pitching for the Braves. Jackie was on third base, Roy Campanella on first, and I feel the tingles from all that time ago. He's going to steal home plate, and it can't be done. But wait and watch. And sure enough, he did. He'd had a record of failures in the attempt that season. Andy Pafko was at the plate. Jackie slid home under the tag and said, I may have a new way. This is very late in his career. And he stole several more after that. But anyway, he was electrifying. He was beautiful to look at, but he was also daring. It was something quite unlike your usual baseball thrill. Anyway, you're fascinated with the shades of Americanism, American quality, American consciousness that they both spoke of, they both embodied.
Yes. We always talk about Black history as something separate from history, something separate from American history. It's this thing that we take and we put into a corner. And if we have a subject or a news event that involves African Americans, then we become important. This story was important to me because nobody would ever associate the Cold War exclusively with Black America. And yet here were these two gigantic figures, these very important figures at the center. It wasn't conscious, but it became something that I was aware of while I was working on it, that the Cold War and Cold War America affected everybody in different ways, in different shades. And there are so very many Cold War stories. And for Robinson and Robeson, these two men, for this one moment in 1949, really embodied that Americanism or that quest for Americanism that you speak. And where is the role of Black people? And what is the effect?
Yeah, you're pointing toward the crucial and poisonous moment in this whole story. It came in July 1949 when Jackie Robinson appeared in Congress before the House Un-American Activities Committee, the dreaded HUAC, witch-hunting Cold War scourge of communism and its real or imagined tentacles in American life. Paul Robeson had made a remark in Paris. He was an enthusiast about the Soviet-Russian possibilities. He was an unabashed left-winger who could imagine Black people, Black Americans, thriving in Russia. Comes the hearing. Paul Robeson is by now HUAC's target in a formal hearing when Jackie Robinson appeared as a witness against him. Perhaps the two most famous Black Americans in their day. First of all, whose idea was it to set Jackie Robinson against Paul Robeson? And just what happened?
Well, the idea came from two sources, really. One was a Black political operator in New Jersey named Alvin Stokes, who was a Republican who was really trying to find ways to be part of the anti-communist movement. And he was someone who had spent many years, as early as 1946, 1947, in a lot of ways investigating Jackie Robinson, trying to find out what side Robinson was on once he integrated the big leagues in 1947. And the other one was Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey, of course, the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who had famously signed Jackie in 1945, October, to join the Brooklyn Dodgers, to be the first African-American to play in the major league since the 1880s. Branch Rickey is one of the most understated characters in this drama. And the reason is because Jackie Robinson had an unbelievable amount of respect for Rickey. He felt he owed Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey was his employer. There was a great deal of pressure on Jackie to testify because of trying to understand what the Cold War, what that period was like. One of the things that you do when you work on a book project, you try to stay in that narrative to give people an idea of what it was like in 1949 to be accused of being a communist, to be accused of being somebody who sympathized with the Soviet Union. It's very difficult for us to think about it now that there is a disqualifying word out there that could end your career and ruin your family and put you in jail and all of these things. This idea of domestic subversion is something that is very hard for people in 2026 to grasp. And so the idea, when Robeson had said at the Paris Peace Conference earlier that year, that it was unthinkable, or he was quoted as saying it was unthinkable that African Americans and Black people would fight against a country that really had been trying to lift up Black people and that was sympathetic to anti-racism, etc. And of course, the response was that you were a traitor, that you were anti-American, and that you were the enemy. You were associating with the enemy. And the only way to counter that when those news stories began to come out in the spring of 1949 was to find somebody of equal prominence, somebody black of equal prominence to counter what Robeson had said. And the only person who was even close at that level was Jackie Robinson. And the reason why I bring up Branch Rickey as part of this is because we speak of April 15th, 1947 with such reverence that this was the moment that the American game was integrated. And all of those things and all those tributes are true. But Rickey did not want to share credit. The left-wing labor communist movement was extremely important in pressuring Brooklyn. Why Brooklyn? Why of all the cities? Why were the Dodgers the team that integrated? Because they were the ones also receiving the most pressure. And when you look at the history of that town, real fertile political, left-wing political activity there, both in the union, in the labor movement, and also with a lot of the Eastern European Jews coming to Brooklyn. That was the hotbed. And when Branch Rickey was in St. Louis, there was not a great deal of pressure on him to integrate. But the minute he came to Brooklyn in 1942, it was a different political pressure. And he was responding to it and certainly did not want to share credit with the left-wing movements. And he wanted to keep the idea that the communists deserved any credit for helping integrate the game. He wanted to keep that narrative at bay. So that was another reason to have Jackie stand up and protect both the Rickey Monument and the Great American Game, per se.
Was Jackie up for this testimony, do we know?
He didn't want to do it. He's a baseball player. And at no point up to that moment did Jackie Robinson really spend any time on geopolitics, at least publicly. He spoke about race, obviously. He spoke about fairness and spoke about equality. But there's nothing in the record at all that would suggest that Jackie Robinson had taken any sort of real interest in the geopolitics of the Cold War at that time. However, he felt a responsibility to Black people. Those hearings on July 13th to July 18th, 1949 were essentially a week of Black people needing to prove their loyalty to the United States. And Robinson felt like he had a responsibility to speak because he felt like if he didn't, that the allies of civil rights, the people who were sympathetic to civil rights and to equal rights, might abandon the cause. It reminds me very similarly of what's happening today. There is a great deal of people in the Black community and a great deal of conversation in the Black community that where we are today with Donald Trump is not our problem. That is the problem of the people who elected him. And if you look at the numbers, Black people didn't elect Donald Trump once nor twice. That is a white American issue, and why are we involved in this? And we should sit this one out. And it was similar in 1949. There were numerous people, scores of people, who would implore Jackie not to get involved. Why would you testify on the part of HUAC? Why would you testify on the side of people who don't even want you to have civil rights, who wouldn't shake your hand? And Jackie's response was because I have a stake in this. If someone is attacking America, then they're attacking me. And I have to be involved in this. And so he risked that standing.
It's a strange spot he was on. He introduced himself with the note that it isn't very pleasant for me to find myself in the middle of a public argument that has nothing to do with the standing of the Brooklyn Dodgers in the pennant race, or even the pay raise I'm going to ask Mr. Branch Rickey for next year. But he ended up saying, with a little bit of a hook in it here, that I and other Americans of many races and faith have too much invested in our country's welfare for any of us to throw it away because of a siren song sung in bass. That's Robeson.
I mean, he did say that, but I don't think he wrote that. It was a very interesting negotiation as to terms of who actually wrote Robinson's remarks. And those remarks were written by Lester Granger, who was the director of the Urban League at the time. And it's really one of the only false notes of Robinson's testimony. He goes through great pains to not really criticize Robeson directly. You can see he's in a bit of a compromised spot. It's an incredibly significant testimony for two reasons. One, obviously, the effect that it would have on civil rights and on Paul Robeson directly. But also because of what Robinson also said, whereas as much as he sort of couched his commentary surrounding Robeson, he was very clear about inequality and job inequality and racism and police brutality. This testimony begins to springboard him into a real political creature. It's the first real inkling where you find out that not only does he have incredible fortitude and toughness, but that he is thinking of himself as a leader. What was interesting to me about that testimony, too, was The press the next day did not talk about that part of it. They talked about the siren song sung in bass. They spent a lot of time about the Robinson criticism of Robeson because that was the purpose of the entire hearing. The committee didn't want to hear about the black grievance. They didn't want to hear about Jackie's feelings on segregation. They wanted him to attack Paul Robeson. And once he did that, that was the news, even though the things he said beyond that were far more historically significant.
It's fascinating in your book, Howard, the black press, in the case of the Baltimore Afro-American, sort of let it go rather lightly. The paper said, at first, sort of warned Jackie, don't go there, drop that gun, Jackie, and don't let yourself be a pawn. But when it was over, the same paper said, our advice to Jackie Robinson, as much as we admire him, is that he put away his pop gun and put on his baseball uniform. He's more a credit to us as a baseball player than a politician.
Well, that's right. And I think that the message there was, you're being used to criticize one of your own. That you may think that you're doing the right thing, but you're really not. The Afro-American was one of the few papers that really publicly came out and criticized Jackie. And I think part of the reason was fear. That once again, as much as people weren't pleased with Jackie testifying, they were also very much afraid, because of the climate of fear, to look as though they were so much on Robeson's side.
Yeah. I take it seriously that you took the whole performance seriously. It's a kind of a charge in your book that Jackie's celebrity had made him a useful cudgel against a political dissenter, and that Jackie, to his bitter regret later on, took the assignment.
Well, no question. Well, he has no other reason to be there without being used in that way. And that's why the title sort of wavers in and out in terms of the kings and the pawns. Who are the people being used? Everybody at some level is being used for some sort of political purpose. And in Robinson's case, it's an old playbook when it comes to black people in this country as well. And I say it today quite often, that the black person willing to criticize other black people publicly will have a job for life. The HUAC people didn't want to be accused of attacking Robeson because of his race. So you needed somebody black to do that work for them. And in doing that work for them, it places you as Jackie Robinson in a very difficult place. The black anti-communist is a new character in American history. And also, if you're a Robinson, you are in the middle of something. On the one hand, you are very much aware of segregation. You are not going to say that segregation and Jim Crow and these things don't exist and are not debilitating. Right. You are very much the epitome of what is taking place in the country. But at the same time, you're also an American. And you're torn in these two directions, and you're torn in a way that is, as W.B. Du Bois would say, is irreconcilable, this two-ness of one trying to defend your country, your country against a common foe, but also recognizing that your country is also the common foe. So how do you navigate these two poles?
Yeah. Howard, I've heard you say that Paul Robeson, on your own deep searching of the record, was the most American person that you've ever studied. Let's listen to Paul Robeson's version of that idea.
I am an American, born there. My father slaved there. Upon the backs of my people was developed the primary wealth of America. So there's a lot of America that belongs to me yet, you understand? But just like a Scottish American is proud of being from Scotland, I'm proud for being African. Now, in our school books, they tried to tell me that all Africans were savages, till I got to London and found most of the Africans I knew were going to Oxford and Cambridge and doing very well. The Africans and the American Negroes have turned out to be an extraordinarily gifted people. So I would say today that I'm an American who is infinitely prouder to be of African descent, no question about it.
It's brilliant.
For you, Howard Bryant, what is the meaning of that most American person line?
What it means to me is when you think about the long history of this country, Paul Robeson's family was American before there was an America.
Yeah.
His family, they were part of Pennsylvania in the 1700s, late 1700s. And so before the country has even become the United States separate from England, the Robesons were here. The famous story of the Robeson family on his mother's side baking bread for Washington's Continental Army. This is the deepest roots of the United States. And his family bloodline predates the United States as a nation. And also in a lot of ways, especially as the country began to attack him for his political beliefs, as the country began to close on him and turn him from an American hero. There was a time when he was called America's number one Negro. Let's not forget that. As much as we talk about Jackie Robinson integrating Major League Baseball in 1947, Paul Robeson integrated Broadway in 1943 with Othello.
Yep.
Previously, the title character was played by white men in blackface. Robeson is phenomenal. Orson Welles in 1950, he played, but very rarely that role would begin to belong to the Keith Davids and, I believe, James Earl Jones and Denzel Washingtons and the rest. It was a stage vehicle for many, many black actors that would follow. And I think that when I considered Robeson as well, no one has lived, very few people have lived as clearly and cleanly an American experience as Robeson, based on the years he was born, from April 9th, 1898 to January 23rd, 1976, an unbelievable time period as well for all of the changes that would take place. And the other thing is that when the country began to attack him, both physically, emotionally, financially, he still had a belief in the tenets of this nation, that this country was going to be just, that the laws were going to apply to him, that when his case came forward, that it would be treated along the lines of justice and fairness. And in a lot of ways, when I was working on this material, I'm thinking, what is he thinking? Why? There's a naivete here. Is it naivete, or is it simply belief, or is it both? That they are treating him extra legally, and yet he still believes in this idea of America.
Right.
That the beauty of both him and Jackie Robinson is that both of their deep, deep idea of America is on display on opposite sides of the same coin. That Robeson does believe that you cannot prevent somebody's right to travel, or prevent their right to work, or prevent their right to live and pursue happiness, etc., on the basis of their political beliefs. That's for other nations to do. That's not for this nation. And that is, the very essence of this country. And even though the actors in the drama are not adhering to those tenets, he believes they will exonerate him. He believes they will protect him, especially in the Peekskill riot.
Remind us of the Peekskill riot.
6 weeks after Jackie's testimony, Robeson decides to go give a concert in Peekskill, New York, about 35 minutes north of Manhattan. And there are back-to-back riots there protesting his presence. After the first one, he decides to go back, and then the second one is even more violent than the first. And the argument was that Robeson, just by going up there, started it himself, that he was the agitator. He was the one who instigated the trouble up there. And his attitude was, we have a right to do these things. And so what good are rights when the law is not going to protect those rights? They're just theoretical. But that goes back to Robeson's deep belief in those laws. And that's why I say that he has the deepest vein of Americanism in him. He's a believer. There's nothing cynical about him when it comes to America, even as America is hurting him, even as America is destroying his career.
Yeah. You're doing what you do so beautifully in the book, Howard, surfacing the silent striving and suffering in these stories. Both Robinson and Robeson died lonely men, not forgotten, but alienated from their sports and from one another. And this whole testimony battle is somehow buried in the unhappiness. There's a miserable sadness in this glorious story, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, but I also found it a very special uplift as well because of the strength of character of both men. Let's not forget, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this book was the hagiography surrounding April 15th, 1947, that the way that Jackie Robinson made so many white fans feel and the way that it made so many black fans feel in terms of, the pride of his experience and the pride of his performance, that we treat April 15th, 1947 as though it is the day that everybody's attitudes had changed. It was the day that baseball had changed, and it wasn't. One of the most frustrating things for Jackie when he testifies against Robeson in 1949 is he has been a part of the baseball system since 1945, 4 years. And there are only 7 players in the major leagues who are African American.
Yeah.
So this idea that he was signed and the seas parted and the skies opened and it was sunny and everyone realized that, gee, keeping these black players out of the game was a mistake, is completely false. The owners of the sport fought for years to not integrate, even when he was showing that he was an excellent player, that there was an idea that black players weren't good enough to play. And once he disproved that, they still didn't want black players in the game. And the reason wasn't because that the owners didn't think that black players could play. It was because they knew that they could. Their fear was, if you have black players in the game, then you're going to have black fans. And black fans sitting next to white fans in the stands are going to ruin the game. That white fans are not going to want to sit next to black people watching baseball games. And so they believed that Robinson represented an existential crisis for the game's finances, that the game was going to be in serious financial trouble if you allowed this to happen. And so this is the attitude. This is the world that Jackie Robinson is entering in, while the fans are cheering him and people are talking about this being this great moment in racial harmony. This is the environment that he's living every single day. And while this is happening, he is also now being asked to testify on behalf of the inherent goodness of America in front of HUAC.
Yeah, this is the heart of the book, Howard. You're rewriting an almost official great American story about how baseball was integrated. In the telling of that story that I grew up with, maybe you too, there were two heroes, white and black. Branch Rickey was the crusty liberal owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers who wanted to break out of segregated baseball, but he needed a Negro player, he thought, who could play magnificently well, but also keep his cool under the taunts of racist players and fans. The other hero was Jackie Robinson, who had been a dominant player with the Kansas City Monarchs, no question about his ability. He asked Rickey if Rickey was looking for someone who didn't have the courage to fight back against the racists. And Rickey said no, he was looking for somebody who had the courage not to fight back. That's a kernel, I think, of the Orthodox story. And it sort of worked out that way. But retell it as you have revised the whole shape of this adventure, especially the Rickey role.
Well, first of all, Branch Rickey wasn't a liberal at all.
But in the myth, he is.
Well, yes, that's right. In the myth, he is this sort of liberating figure. In fact, his enemies would refer to him as Massa Rickey and Abraham Lincoln, and some of the nastier columns in the sporting press would talk about the blacks up in Harlem building a monument to Branch Rickey. I mean, it's how much they felt betrayed by Rickey bringing Robinson into the game. Not only did the owners feel betrayed, but so did a lot of the press who wanted the game to be just the way it was. And so, that piece of it is so ingrained in all of us because it makes everybody feel good. And when the truth of the matter is that Branch Rickey didn't want to integrate at all with black American players. When he began the search for a black player, he did not begin that search in the United States. He began that search in Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, and the rest of Latin America. He was looking for a black player who was not a citizen. So two things could happen. One, the game would be integrated, and you would have a new talent source of players. But the second thing is that the American order of segregation would not be upset. These players would come out on a work visa, and then they could go back home.
Yeah.
But if you have an American black player, now you are not just integrating baseball, you're also integrating the society. And Rickey wanted nothing to do with that. And that is not the story that we were all brought up with. And because of that, we have a distortion. And that distortion fed Branch Rickey. There are very few people in this country whose history has gone more unchallenged than Branch Rickey's when it comes to the integration of Major League Baseball. And
did Jimmy Breslin, who wrote about Branch Rickey, sort of fall for a PR line?
I think he did, but I also think that there's something admirable about it. Like, let's think about this. Branch Rickey wanted fairness in the game. He did the thing. Did he do the thing for the right reasons? Yeah, he did the thing for the right reasons because he thought that everyone should have a chance to play the American game. So you have to start there. In 1943, Paul Robeson addresses Major League Baseball to appeal to them to integrate 4 years before Jackie enters the game. And At the end of that meeting, it's the first time that a black delegation has ever addressed the owners of the sport. Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis is presiding over this meeting. And when that meeting ends, it was simply a PR stunt. They had no intention of listening to the black delegation of reporters or of Paul Robeson's address. And yet there's one person in that meeting who is persisting to continue the conversation when the meeting is adjourning. And it's Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey says, well, are we going to discuss the delegation that was here today? And the answer had been no, but is a wonderful exchange between Rickey and Kennesaw Mountain Landis talking about what are we going to do about this issue? And that is the first time where you recognize that, oh, Branch Rickey is up to something. He's the only one in that meeting. Tom Yaki's in that meeting of the Boston Red Sox. He's there. Wrigley's in the meeting. The great names of baseball that we know are in that meeting. And nobody is saying a word. Bob Quinn of the Boston Braves is in that meeting. Nobody is talking. And of course, Calvin Griffith, the racist owner of the Washington Senators, he's in the meeting and he's talking. He's saying, hey, let's wrap this up and get some lunch. We don't want to talk about this subject. He does not want to integrate. But that is a very powerful moment. So as much as Branch Rickey does pit Robinson and Robeson against each other, and he's very much aware of who Paul Robeson is. That's the other piece of this, is that Branch Rickey knows exactly who Robeson is and has a bit of an obsession with Robeson up until the day Rickey dies of a heart attack in 1965. He feels that American racism has damaged this great American man. It's extremely condescending in a lot of ways because Rickey is very clearly politically, he is a right-wing, anti-communist, yes, but he really is an anti-New Dealer. He's an anti-FDR guy. He is the political opposite of Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson is a healthcare for all, 99% against the 1% socialist who believes that socialism is, in his words, a higher form of governance. He and Rickey are on the exact opposite ends of this story. And one of the arguments that I make is that Rickey had been spending several years trying to find his Paul Robeson, and it was Jackie Robinson. He was trying to find somebody who was going to be able to counter this other narrative. And so, yes, you're 100% right that this story we have been told, it's a fairy tale in a lot of ways. And the person who both benefits and is hurt the most by the fairy tale is Jackie Robinson. He becomes an American hero, absolutely. But he is also, in a lot of ways, treated very, very poorly because people are not aware of the suffering that he's going through. And therefore, as the country begins to shift, as there are more black players in the game, as we start to move into this new sort of era of civil rights and potentially equality, people are looking at Robinson as though he's just this bitter old man who can't be satisfied. When the real pain of both of these men is that both of them had an unbelievable belief in this potential of the country, and both ended up believing that it didn't measure up. You get to 1969, and the combination of his disappointment with how baseball has not progressed at the speed he'd wanted it to. He had no relationship with baseball after he retired in 1956. And then to see how ambivalent this country was towards civil rights, and to be hurt by that, and then to also see all of the bloodshed of Vietnam, which he was a huge supporter of and was in great conflict with Martin Luther King Jr. on. And so now by the time he gets to 1969, the great Jackie Robinson, who served the country in the military, who served the country as this great pioneer, doesn't stand for the flag, doesn't acknowledge the national anthem, and really does feel like the country didn't measure up. And so one of the most poignant pieces for me was, as the country is being torn apart by Vietnam, the New York Times does a piece on the popularity of the American flag, very similarly to the way that we saw during 9/11, this uptick of sales in the actual flag. And so the Times does a piece, and I believe the headline was "The American Flag, Thrill for Some, Threat to Others," or something like that. And the reporter interviews Jackie Robinson. And Robinson says that he does not believe that the flag represents goodness to him. And I believe he gave a quote that says something along the lines of, if I see a car with a bumper sticker of the American flag on the back, I assume the guy behind the wheel is not my friend. That is an incredible thing to say for somebody who has traveled the road that Jackie Robinson had traveled in this country.
It's the incredible layering of this story that pulls us in. The characters and the old history, the present day, the fact that people can be kings one day and pawns the next, the mix of reality and propaganda, a lot of media manipulation, all of it interacting. I hope you can still find and feel heroism or nobility in the story as you've turned it all around, and I can.
When the book came out, we had an event at the Jackie Robinson Museum down in Tribeca, and David Robinson, Jackie's son, was there. And during the Q&A section, David stood up and he had said, I haven't read the book yet. I want to know, is there any joy in there? My father wasn't just this bitter man. It wasn't just misery all the time. He believed. And, do you portray my father as just this pained figure? And I said, no, I didn't. For me, what I found about Jackie was the toughness, was the belief, was the fact that even though he said those things in the New York Times, he is still privately meeting with owners to get them to hire more Black employees, Black players, Black front office. He's still pushing. He goes to the Supreme Court on behalf of Curt Flood, who was pushing for player rights, famously because players at that time were bound to one team for life. There was no free agency back then. And who's there testifying on behalf of Curt Flood and baseball players? It's Jackie Robinson. No matter what he felt about the shortcomings of the country, he never lost sight of his values. And that, to me, is the most powerful thing about him, about his values, in a lot of ways, asking the country to catch up to him and not the other way around.
Yeah. I so admire the contemporary feeling of the story you've written, Howard, and the way you've told it from the heart of a modern Black man yourself. Some of the issues that Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson embodied still echo. For example, Colin Kaepernick was a Super Bowl quarterback with the San Francisco 49ers, but he was driven out of football for taking a knee during the national anthem in protest against racism and inequality in our country today. Is he the Paul Robeson of the moment?
That's a tough one, simply because I don't think there is another Robeson. I mean, nobody took Colin Kaepernick's passport and didn't let him travel for a decade.
True.
When you talk about the word cancel, Colin Kaepernick was not allowed to play football, but Colin Kaepernick was not ostracized in the United States. He could still travel. He still made money. People still cared about him. People still revered him. Paul Robeson was a pariah. And the Black community contributed to it. At least the Black leadership contributed to it. The government pursued him and hunted him in extremely unconstitutional and extra-legal ways. There's no comp to what was done to Robeson, unless you're talking about, W.E.B. Du Bois or some of the other people who the government did not allow to travel. Like, the way that the government brought its full force down on him is its own special category. But I think that the power of the story and the reason why it was so important to me was exactly what you're saying, that so many of these things, when you're working on these chapters, you're saying, okay, well, this sounds like today and this feels like today. And the number of times where, you're banning books in Florida, this sounds like today. And you're forcing first graders to learn about the evils of communism. This sounds like back then. And the attack on higher education and universities and media and the arts. All of the things that are happening today have a 1950s Cold War playbook. And it's not a coincidence. Donald Trump learned from Roy Cohn, who was McCarthy's attorney. He was his lawyer back then. So there's a lineage to all that is happening right now. And one of the people that we didn't really talk about in the book, who I thought was fantastic, just as a spine, as a moral spine, is Du Bois. Yes. To me, it's always fascinating. We talk about history as though it's this dusty relic. But if you're born in the right time, if you live during the right years, you cover so much ground. Du Bois was born in 1868 in Great Barrington. 3 years after the Civil War, he overlaps as an adult. As an adult, he overlaps with Robert E. Lee and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and William Monroe Trotter and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and Joseph McCarthy and all of these characters in one lifetime. And so it's not that far away. It's not so long ago. It's a fascinating story of not only what we've been, but what we continue to be.
Yeah, Howard, I have another big general question before we're done, but it involves history and the present too. The scholar Brandon Terry has written a wonderful book around the cultural representation of Black America, as he puts it. And he says, we're hurting. That cultural representation is not what it was in Jackie Robinson's time. In church music, even jazz music, church life, the nobility of athletes too, like Muhammad Ali, for example. Brandon Terry feels that we're all poorer for want of those self-conscious, driven examples of the very best in us. What's your own view, Howard Bryant, of what Black sports stars can be expected to represent to their country?
Well, I think that the Black athlete is the most visible, most successful, most influential Black employee this country has ever produced. They're the ones who made it. They're the ones that we look to because they're the ones who made it. They've got the money. And people would say, well, gee, how would you make that argument that how could you say that they're more valuable or more influential than Beyonce or Louis Armstrong? And I would say very clearly that throughout the history of this country, white people have always allowed Black people to entertain them. But if we're going to be on the same team and we're going to eat together and we're going to win together and lose together and shower together and travel together, then why can't we go to school together? You needed a movement for sports.
True.
The integration of sports integrates the society. And that's very, very different than going up on a stage in the Cotton Club, and playing. So the athlete has a responsibility that I think has always been outsized. I think it's always been unfair. But the expectation, because they are the ones who are so visible, is that they are being asked to speak. And in a lot of ways, I agree with Malcolm X, where he referred to the Black entertainer and the Black athlete as puppets, that we as a people are overmatched, that we are asking people who hit a ball with a stick or have really good singing pipes to be our political leaders as well. And that puts them in very, very difficult political situations, as Jackie Robinson found himself in. It's always been my feeling that real progress and success will be measured by how little we need them. The more we need LeBron James to speak for us or Colin Kaepernick to risk his career for us, the less progress I think that we've made. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, but I think I still disagree a bit. I'm a Celtics fan. I'm thinking of, again, cultural representation, but in the Celtics, lo these many years, the examples of Bill Russell and Red Auerbach, and nowadays Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Derek White and many more. This is more than entertainment, and I think it's deeply significant for all of us, growing up and growing old. The example of, in the Celtics case, the famous defensive discipline, the sublime togetherness of those players, mind, body, and spirit, I think that's us at our best, and I mean it as human beings.
Sure. I mean, there's no question there's value in those tenets of sports, and a lot of that can be reflected in sports. However, the point that I'm trying to make is that you are asking these Black athletes to do something that you're not asking of anybody else. We're not having the same conversation about Tommy Heinsohn or Bob Cousy or Gene Conley. And the reason is that is not their responsibility. And one of the great things in, Gary Pomerantz's great book on Bob Cousy, The Last Pass,
right.
is the fact that for everything we talk about, in a lot of ways, Russell is not that different from Jackie Robinson in terms of the mythology. The mythology was that the Celtics were this great example of togetherness. In a lot of ways, they weren't. A lot of ways, Russell had to carry that by himself, and he carried it in silence. And now that we know the end of the story changes. But in the middle of it, as you know, because you were at a lot of those games, people didn't come. They were the greatest basketball team in the history of basketball. And those stands were empty.
I remember it well. 13,909 every night when the Bruins played, the place was jammed. Not so with the Celtics. Might have been 8,000 at best.
They won 8 straight championships.
Do we ask too much of these men? And did we ask too much of Jackie Robinson?
Of course. But that's not the issue. The issue isn't what's being asked of you. The issue is what you do in your time. Obviously, Jackie Robinson or whomever was in his position you don't want to do these things. I'm sure Martin Luther King or Gandhi or whomever, they didn't want to be in these positions. You're in the position because this is your time. And in your moment in time, this is what is being asked of you. And it's up to you to decide if you're going to accept the challenge and what you're going to do at that time. Roy Campanella gave plenty of interviews where he would say that Ricky had also asked him to testify and he had sort of chosen not to.
Interesting.
Or that he was somebody in that same mix. I mean, they were teammates, and so it didn't only have to be Jackie that was going to testify. But what are you going to do with your time? That, to me, is really what is on Paul Robeson's tombstone. The artist has to make a choice. I have made mine. Robeson could have easily signed the affidavit that said, yeah, I'm not a communist and I can go back to singing or whatever, or chosen not to engage. But he made his choice that this was the path that he was going to take in his time. Do I wish that ball players could just go put the ball in the hoop and go do their thing? Sure. But that's not what has been asked of them during this period.
They're much more interesting as people.
I think so. But they are also being asked to do something that is not being asked of their peers. Does it make them more interesting? Absolutely. But it is unfair.
It's unfair that we have to stop, Howard Bryant. Kings and Pawns is a marvelous book about sports and almost everything else. I so enjoy meeting you, and I look forward to talking again, Howard.
Call anytime.
Thank you, Howard Bryant.
Thank you.
Kings and Pawns, Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson in America is Howard Bryant's 11th book about sports world. He's decorated also for his magazine work, and between assignments, he's the sports correspondent for NPR's Weekend Edition. Here at Open Source, we count on listener support. If you haven't done your part yet, please go to radioopensource.org/donate and pitch in to keep the world's first and longest-running podcast going strong. We are proud to be a founding member of Hub and Spoke, a Boston-based collective of independent voices in podcasting. Check the range of our interests here, art to technology to politics and history, at hubspokeaudio.org. You'll be glad you did. And thank you